We're all from GreyOrange, so I lead product marketing, and I have a couple of my colleagues here from the product side of the business, Mayank and Wes, and between them they have over 10 years experience in robotics. This is a fairly new market, so that's actually quite significant. And we're going to walk through and spend this session really demystifying, hopefully, not just warehouse automation. We're going to focus in specifically on autonomous mobile robotics. We're going to talk a little bit about the technology. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the areas of a warehouse that can benefit most from this technology. We'll talk a little bit about the software side as well. And then we're going to focus on some of the ways that you can get started, some of the considerations, and share a few stories that we have at GreyOrange. We're a large mobile robotics company that we've had over the years with implementing solutions at some of our client sites. And I will do my best to leave a good 5 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. Between us, we should be able to answer, hopefully, all of your questions. So let me see if this clicker works. All right, let me just start off very quickly with talking about the changing face of warehouse automation. I mean, we know that automation has been around for a very long time. It's critical for increasing the efficiency and throughput in the warehouse. But what we're going to talk about today is really focus on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you think about some of the technological advancements that have happened in recent years around artificial intelligence and robotics and IoT, this has given us the ability to have a whole wave of innovation in warehouse automation, which is mobile robotics, which gives us a lot more flexibility, lower cost, and much faster return on investment than some of the traditional types of automation. Let me just click this again. So let me just kind of set the scene a little bit. I'm hoping that with some of the folks in the audience who are in the business of running warehouses, this is going to resonate with you a little bit. That ever since the pandemic really took e-commerce off like a rocket, the challenges have been mounting in terms of how we can be efficient with fulfillment. So it's everything from a combination of meeting all the needs of the different sales channels now, store fulfillment, online. How do you handle things like increasing demands from customers around free shipping, same-day shipping? Everybody wants to be able to return pretty much anything they want, and of course, they don't want to pay costs for that. So there's lots of challenges that are making the amount of throughput that we need to put through these warehouses increase dramatically, and then at the same time, the labor shortage is as bad as ever. I mean, there's just not enough people to go around to do all of the tasks that we need in the warehouse. And there's economic pressures as well, and then increased competition. I mean, this one's really important as well. I mean, if you don't, it's not really an option to say, do I need to support these new expectations? If you don't support them, somebody else out there will. And this is really where mobile robotics comes in, is helping provide scalable, flexible, high return on investment solutions to help address some of these issues. Let me start off with maybe, Wes, do you want to take this one? And maybe, Wes, you can talk a little bit about what is autonomous mobile robotics, and where specifically in the warehouse do these technologies fit?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, absolutely. We can talk about this just for a moment. So if you think about AMRs, autonomous mobile robotics, and really where they fit in a warehouse, you'll see on the screen behind me, this is GreyOrange's version of a typical warehouse or e-commerce operation, very common throughout the industry. Without getting up and pointing to it, it really covers everything from unloading of trucks, pallets worth of material. Those could either be moved into deep storage on the back wall before they're called forward into a picking area. Those can also be moved cross-dock. So we call that dock-to-stock and cross-docking. So if you think about these and all of the different type of robots that are on this page, and we'll talk about those, we'll show larger images on the next page. I mean, historically in this industry, I think most OEMs that have been in this industry thus far, they've really kind of approached this from a point solution problem. You know, they'll solve a person to goods problem, they'll solve a point-to-point, material movement problem, they'll solve a sortation problem. And that's the way the industry has evolved thus far. Why don't you go to the next slide if you could, Sara, and then I'll talk about it as well. So, and to talk about this a little bit, and to be full disclosure and fairness, a lot of the robots that we show on here are GreyOrange versions of robots that solve all these various types of use cases in a warehouse. But you'll notice, I mean, from this show alone, there are dozens, there's always several, sometimes dozens of suppliers that do something very similar. And that phenomena itself is what we really like to talk about with GreyOrange's enterprise software layer that we call Grey Matter. You may have seen recently where we launched and announced an open API for Grey Matter that actually allows virtually any other robot on this show floor, by working with Grey Matter, that we can integrate that into our execution layer and run not only Grey Matter branded and built robots, we can partner and run with any robotic solution that wanted to work with that open API. Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll be glad to walk through some form factors. For those of you that are relatively new, on the left side of this slide, you'll see what we call rack to person. This is the original form factor that was launched by Kiva and Amazon originally. And GreyOrange is the leader in this space that actually picks up a complete shelving unit, will move it downstream to an order picking location, and then return it when a picker's through with that. On the right of that, a person-to-goods solution. These are companies that move a much smaller robot into an actual goods area where people typically exist in a zone, a dynamic picking zone, and people will actually take directions from the screen on the robot. They'll pick into order totes, and then that robot will come back out to a downstream pack out area. You'll see below that, you see tote to person. That robot was initially launched by Robotics that GreyOrange partners with. That robot can actually, it's a mobile version of what everybody historically has thought of as an ASRS, where it can go into very high bays of totes, and it can carry out up to 8 totes at a time. Again, always downstream to a order picking station. Okay, material handling, several versions of this on the market. These really are encompassed by both forklifts and AMRs, but this is much more around either individual case movement or more and more frequently is pallet movement. They're a more cost-effective, more efficient solution oftentimes versus a forklift. So I would say a more recent and really, really fast-growing market opportunity around a material handling AMR is case pick. So, I mean, this is probably one of the most prevalent use cases across every industry in commerce. Doesn't matter if it's grocery, home goods, virtually any beverages, anything, but think about building a rainbow pallet or a mixed case pallet. And that's a relatively new use case that is it's a very high growth opportunity within material handling. Then the last one, again, forklifts or sortation, where orders, individual SKUs are moved from homogeneous SKU totes, where they are inducted into a sortation station, and then they're sorted out to individual customer orders.
So if I can maybe just switch gears for a minute, because there's so many different form factors and different scenarios that you talked about there. Do you want to, Mike, maybe talk us through a little bit about the software side? Because I think software plays a really key part in making sure that we can use these technologies effectively to really automate processes in the warehouse.
Yes, sure. So, am I audible? Is my mic on? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so yeah, so from a software perspective, like Wes pointed out, you can go around this entire show and you'll see like a new bot every time you turn around, and it is almost impossible for anyone on in this entire building to be able to know about or to be able to talk about each and every bot, right? But inherently, whenever you're applying automation, you're solving a problem, right? And that problem is often not really, something you're solving just via the hardware, the bot. It's more often than not something you're solving via the software. Now, what does the software need to do, right? So if you look at the evolution of software in this industry, you've moved away from a traditional WMS, which essentially is a record keeping system, right? It's just a record keeping system where you're recording transactions, to WCS's warehouse control systems, which control the fixed hardware, right? To what is now a modern warehouse execution system, or a WES, which tends to essentially be the smart or the intelligent software layer, not just running the transactions, but also running all the hardware, right? And a WES is essentially that one single system that needs to be able to orchestrate order, inventory, people, and machine to be able to give you any sort of benefit from all of these bots that you see around you. Without that one single layer, which is actually orchestrating all of these bots, and oftentimes multiple bots, so a multi-agent orchestrator, you're not really going to get any benefit out of all of these bots. Wes, you want to add something?
No, honestly, I think Mayank really summarized that well. I guess the piece that I would add is, again, WMS, very traditional software layer, WCS, working with PLCs, things like that in a warehouse. GreyOrange, as we've addressed the warehouse execution system, we've continued to also look for opportunities to pull in what are traditional WMS areas of functionality. So GreyOrange is, I would say, sphere of control within warehouse execution software is actually growing and expanding and adding value beyond what was a traditional WES domain.
So maybe I can just kind of summarize that. So lots of really cool, new, flexible technology, which is really mobile, autonomous robots, plus the software layer on top. For me, coming into the industry a year ago, it's kind of intimidating with all the different choices and different ways of doing things. I mean, Mike, how do you get started? What's the best approach for getting started?
Yeah, I think this works. So, yeah, so okay, so I think we get down to the meat of this entire conversation, right? So, like I said, you could go around this entire building and you would never be able to capture all of the hardware that's in here, all of the bots that are in here, all of the automation that's in here. So, essentially, if you're starting out in this journey, you need to figure out a few things, right? Can I afford to automate? What's my ROI going to look like? Do I have a business case to automate? Is there any point going with the shiny object that you can see across the room as opposed to just going with the traditional stuff, right? So ROI is extremely important, and that's where I think you need to really think about not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? Going and investing millions of dollars, setting up a facility, buying all the shiny objects you can without even knowing whether it'll work or not. So maybe do the smart thing, right? Do what software did, go with a SaaS approach, invest into operating expenses, treating these as operating expenses instead of CapEx. That's probably a smart way to go about doing it, right? And then really, if you think about it, as you grow in terms of your fulfillment needs, in terms of the complexity that you have with all of this automation, you also need to figure out how all the software layers would interact with each other, right? So you have all of these WMSs, you might have conveyors in your facility, you might be running all sorts of fixed automation. How does all of that come together with another software that you put in that facility to run AMRs as well, right? Can you make it more simple? Can you make sure that your WMS and the software that's running all of these automation, they integrate seamlessly? de-risk yourself, right? That's basically the bottom line with any software investment you make over here. Wes, you want to take
actually, I'm thinking crawl, walk, run is a term that I've heard a lot actually from our implementation team. Because we have the flexibility with the software to switch using different robots as well as stitch a set of different robots together in order to execute a particular workflow. Do you want to talk a little bit maybe about crawl, walk, run, Wes, in terms of where you can get started maybe with person to goods and...
Sure, yeah, I can add a little color to that. I think that if you look at all of the different AMR technologies and those use cases that we discussed earlier, probably person to goods is one of the simplest places to enter. Frankly, it's easier to enter in what we would call a brownfield location versus a greenfield site. And it's a very low challenge, low difficulty way to integrate with a picking workforce. That's a relatively simple way to get started. Probably one of the next simplest is in material movement. But where you really are going to start to see the largest bang for your buck in terms of ROI is when you start to move into your large goods-to-person implementations, either a rack-to-person or a tote-to-person implementation. And as those all come to bear, operating in one enterprise, that's really when your ROI takes a huge positive step forward versus the operation run in a traditional way.
Well, thanks for that. Actually, one thing we didn't talk about before, which would be good to touch on, is how does this affect the workforce? I mean, sometimes you hear in a lot of industries, oh, the robots are going to come in, they're going to take all the jobs, and comments from either of you, actually, if you want to take a stab at it in terms of workforce.
Yeah, I think honestly, if you look at it, automation does not really replace labor, right? And that's what you need to make sure that you have the conviction of when you're putting in automation over there, so that conviction actually goes off and is translated to your workforce as well. Automation is an enabler in all of the in all of our experience. Generally, when automation has gone into a facility, you see higher retention rates, so lower turnover for your labor. You see a much happier workforce, and you see much more productivity, right? So when you put that all into consideration, you're probably spending a lot less time training, you're spending a lot less time recruiting, while you're also getting much better productivity, which means overall it's actually a no-brainer from a workforce perspective, because a happy workforce is going to get you so much more in terms of your ROI than any automation that you put in there, right? So that's how we look at it.
Excellent. Wes, anything to add? Or?
The only thing I would add to that is, and again, it's a positive for the workforce, is similar to the manufacturing world. When, machinists 40 years ago had a certain skill set. A machinist today has a CNC skill set or a technology that they've added to their resume besides just the ability to cut machine tools. Similar here, the opportunity for those employees to now work with automation, what we've seen in a lot of our implementations is that those employees actually get, I think, a more enriching experience based on the technology they get to work with than how they used to perform the job without it.
Excellent. All right, so I'm looking at the time, and this is a perfect time to switch away from talking about technology and actually start talking about some stories. And I think we've got 2 or 3 different stories that we thought we'd share. We're not going to name the sites themselves. We just want to talk through a little bit about some of the challenges in each of these instances. They all have a different flavor, and some of the details of the solution and why we went a particular direction, and also some of the outputs and the impacts that those have had. Do you want to kick things off, Mayank, with the first one, which is focusing around an omnichannel operation?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, so let's talk about an omnichannel operation, right? Everyone thought pre-COVID that they were omni-channel, and then COVID hit. You had channel conflicts. All of your numbers flipped, and people discovered they were multi-channel. They weren't really omni-channel, right? And we had a client who wanted to run omni-channel operations, faced some similar problems, right? You had separate handling of inventory and orders for e-com and retail, right? So inventory was basically bifurcated between the two. It was difficult to get delivery timelines or hit delivery timelines for the e-com orders, whereas retail was easier for them. And when it came to retail, now they were picking store orders, sending it to their stores downstream, and then when orders reached the store, they would need to start picking it apart, dividing it by planogram, and then putting it into their shelves, right? So the replenishment time at the store was really large, and it was pretty labor intensive. So that's when we went into this journey with this particular retailer. They're a fast fashion retailer, one of the largest in the world, right? And we automated forward picking for them. We automated sortation for them. We also automated the intralogistics for these guys, right? So now what we do with these guys is they get pallets on the inbound or cases in the inbound, load it onto an intralogistics bot, which takes it to a cross-dock area, a forward picking area, or a reserve area, replenish the reserve shelves, use a RTP system in the forward area to then put some of the inventory there. And the cross-dock inventory just goes to a VAS station. They cross-dock it and push it out. In the forward picking area, they pick via the RTP bots, getting a productivity of about 250 to 300 fairly easily on the e-com side, 350 to 400 on the retail side. They manage their consolidation completely in an automated manner. They manage their sortation post-picking for e-com orders completely in an automated manner. And all of the bots and all of the resources for all of these flows are actually shared between different flows, right? So there's load balancing across all of these flows. And so they're not really having to divide workforce by e-com, by retail, or by cross-dock. It's actually being managed completely in a single area by a single system, making it truly omni-channel. If COVID were to hit those guys again tomorrow and channels flipped and e-com again rose up to 90–95% of all orders, they would be able to fulfill every single order without skipping a beat, right? That's actually an omni-channel operation, actually enabled by robotics and automation.
Yeah, it was a pretty big story about one.
Yep.
So actually, we're going to have some time at the end for questions. If anyone's got any more questions about that specific scenario, Mayank or Wes can certainly answer those. But let's take a look at the second one. This one I think is very interesting. This is a dark store, and part of the thing that would be good for you to talk about, Mike, is the speed at which this this particular solution was implemented, because it's pretty transformational.
Yep, and we've seen this, right? So a lot of retail space basically started opening up. Like you did not really need some of the stores that you had previously in fairly large locations at malls or in urban locations. And so when you had all of this, vacant real estate in your retail stores, how do you optimize for the other channel which is just spiked up, right? The e-com side of the business. So we work with, again, a very large departmental store customer, and these guys had huge stores, like 200, 300,000 square feet. They wanted to convert that into a last mile fulfillment center or a dark store. Now, what was important for these guys was just the speed of implementation and the ability to go live very, very quickly, because they started seeing this huge spike in e-com, right? And when that happened, two problems. One, this is a brownfield area. How do you retrofit it with automation to start actually making fulfillment from a place like that not be cost prohibitive, and in terms of cost per unit be effective? Secondly, this is a store. You don't have a WMS in there, so you don't really have software for picking it all. So if you're bringing in automation, do you need to bring in software as well, right? And so we worked with these guys where we integrated directly with their OMS, their TMS, without having to bring in a WMS. going live from within a period of about 2 to 3 months, I think, and essentially retrofitting the entire store with an automated solution to pick at a productivity which gave them enough benefits to shift a lot of volumes from their WMS, from the central warehouse to this dark store, right? And they solved for the last mile fulfillment cost, the delivery cost. That came down, and really the business case was, I think, less than 12 months for these guys, which is phenomenal in terms of implementation, in terms of really thinking about how automation could solve a real life problem for them.
Yeah, that was a really agile one. This one, I would also be good if you could touch on this one, Mayank, which is a pure e-commerce site, if I remember correctly. If you can talk about this one.
Yeah, so I think what happens is, and I think Wes touched upon it a little bit, when you automate, you're not really just, I mean, think about it, right? You'll start picking orders at 300, 400 units per hour. That's fantastic, right? Pick orders that fast, but you're not really going to be able to get all of those orders out to the customers as quickly. Why is that? Now, that's because you'll just shift the bottleneck from picking onto packing. And when you shift the bottleneck from picking to packing, you're just shifting the problem from one area to another, right? And this was largely the premise of what we started doing with, a really large general merchandise retailer. These guys had e-com operations that needed them to not just pick quickly, but pack and ship quickly as well. Now, automation cannot solve that. You will still need to get a human generally after picking to pick all of the order, put it in a box, and then label it and ship it. Even if you get an automated packing machine, you'd still not be able to do that with 100% of orders, which is where you need to be innovative with the way you use automation. What we did was essentially use multiple agents within the picking operation to not just pick very, very quickly. We picked at 250, 300 UPH again, but also use a combination of an automated packing machine and another agent to pick directly into 40 different packing boxes on demand, so that since the operator was picking directly into these packing boxes, there was no need for packing at the end of the picking cycle, right? So you are picking directly into a packing box, which is then getting transported to a station where somebody is just looking at it, sticking a label, doing some dunnage and sending it out. So your packing operations was running at almost the same speed as the picking operations now. And so you basically remove the bottleneck around packaging. And this was really a huge win for these guys because it did not just bring down the labor required in picking, but the overall labor in the warehouse reduced by 40 or 50%. Their cost per unit actually decreased for fulfillment, decreased by more than 60%, right? Our calculations is it is going to be one of the best in the industry. And the ability to orchestrate multiple bots to run a complex operation like this is basically what made the business case for these guys and made it possible for them to, do this at the best of industry standards.
Excellent. Well, let me just make a few comments before we switch it up for some Q&A. And clearly, we all work for GreyOrange, and we wanted to make this session to be talking about, in general, some of the capabilities that autonomous mobile robots provide. But at the same time, we also wanted to give you some of our perspectives and our closing thoughts on the most effective way to do automation. So first of all, it is a journey, and it's okay to take small steps first and gradually grow into something that's bigger. So it's definitely a journey, and if you pick the right vendors to play with, then you can literally start off with some point automation and gradually expand and build more and more in. The biggest risk, though, is not taking action at all. And I forget the exact statistics, Wes. Do you know what the percentage is for companies that are using autonomous robots today?
Yeah, we've got some data. There's a few companies that are really starting to do a lot of analysis in this space. Interact Analysis is probably the leader. According to them, there's the market is growing at about a 50% rate every year, which, based on what you see around you, isn't surprising. But what's really compelling and encouraging and exciting for this industry is that there's only a single-digit level of adoption for robotic automation in warehousing and e-commerce today. It's actually forecast to hit about 12% total industry penetration, but not until 2027. That's how much opportunity there is in the industry.
So when I say the biggest risk is not taking action, the way I look at it is if your competitors are doing this and you're not doing this, then they're going to be getting the edge in terms of setting customer expectations, and they're going to be more competitive, and the business is going to be, going to the companies that are moving the fastest. So biggest risk is not taking action, but automation is a journey. You don't just have to leap right in with a huge project. You can start off in small steps. I think the as-a-service business model really, really helps. Because again, it means that people can take small steps rather than the huge upfront capex investments that we're maybe typically used to with some of the automation solutions from the past. I would say look for solutions that don't lock you in. And again, you can see on the show floor here, there's so many different types of technologies out there. So you want to be in a position when you're making your choices where you have that flexibility. We're actually robot agnostic at GreyOrange in our software platform. So that's obviously something that's particularly pertinent for us. Do think process and not just point automation. I think some of the use cases that Mayank talked about, and the reason that they had such compelling return on investment and benefits at the end, was because they were processes that were automated versus point solutions. So thinking about things in terms of an end-to-end process, you don't want to automate one part and then have a bottleneck somewhere else. So think process and not just point automation. Definitely look at ROI and total cost of ownership. And then the last point is ask questions and learn, because this is a relatively nascent new industry, which means that there's lots of new stuff coming out, but there's lots of companies, GreyOrange included, that are really happy to spend the time with you and help you understand what this technology is about and how this technology can help you. And with that, I'm going to switch for a second and see if there are questions right now, if anyone's got any questions that they want to ask.
Thank you for the insights, team. To follow up on your question or your observation around the process versus a point solution, and I thought the example you gave was great, which is, okay, we shifted, we got the picking right, but packing's a bottleneck, so we really didn't help the customer solve the problem, and the ROI still doesn't look great. What are you seeing in terms of the data necessary to do that process optimization? And how are you looking at it maybe from a software perspective or algorithms, work allocation? Because some of these things are more the domain maybe of software than a strong automation equipment approach. Thank you.
Yeah, Mayank, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, no, I think
His works.
So I think I'll break that question into two parts. So you talked about how do you know, or how do you sort of gauge whether it's a process automation and what are the processes you need to automate versus a point automation. So on that, I'd say that when you look at solutioning, when you look at figuring out, hey, what's the productivity going to be like? How much investment do I need to make? What are the number of bots I need? Or, all of that, draw that entire solution out through the entire life cycle of orders, right? So if you're running e-com, start from inbound and just go all the way to outbound, because if you don't do that, if you just do a point solution, you wouldn't even know, and the process would have shifted in terms of bottleneck, right? So go through the entire life cycle of your inventory and your order, and that would basically easily point out where the bottlenecks shifted to. And if it's not enough of a bottleneck in terms of, hey, I can put more manpower behind the process and I can still make it work, then you can still go with point solution and it'll work, right? That's the first part of the answer. The second one, in terms of software, in terms of algorithms, yeah, I completely agree with you, and that's why we often think of this being actually a software first problem, where it's not really as important to be able to get stuff from A to B. I think getting stuff from A to B is fairly easy. Getting a bot to carry a tote or carry a carton or carry a pallet from point A to point B is actually pretty easy. It's not half as difficult as people would think it is, right? What is difficult is really the software side of it. And when I talked about the fact that you need to think about load balancing, you need to think about inventory orchestration, you need to think about order processing, these are going to be a software first problem rather than a hardware or an automation problem. And I think that's where the shift to the WES is also really happening. Why WES as a software layer is becoming more important is because, like I said, a WMS is a system of transaction or a system of record. It's not going to drive your processes, right? WCS is just talking to the hardware, making it move. That's not going to solve it. That's where a WES becomes like so much more important. And then we've seen like, especially with cloud implementations of, the modern WES systems, multi-agent orchestrators, these also need to become smarter over time, right? Because if you have all of that processing power on cloud, you have the modern AI and ML logic, it makes no sense that if you're picking at 200 UPH today, you're still doing 200 1 year down the line. Your software should have become smarter. That's what you expect of your smartphone. Why would you not expect that from like automation in the warehouse?
Yeah.
That's essentially how we look at it.
Yeah, I've always had this belief actually that hardware is almost depreciating the minute you open the box, whereas software in the cloud, it's appreciating all the time. And what you start off with is going to be a baseline, but you're going to be continuing to get more and more automation, more and more capabilities, more and more optimization over a period of time. So yeah, that's something actually, thank you for that question, because that's something we're pretty passionate about at GreyOrange. Anyone on this side got a question? I can't actually see, the lights are a little bit bright. Oh, there we go, yeah.
Yep, I was going to ask about the first example you guys brought up. You said you were doing the omni-channel experience. Yep. You had one robot. You had the same fleet of robots that were shared between workflows. Could you just talk more about which robots were chosen and why?
Sure. So, like I pointed out, so we did like 3 different agents in the same, within the same facility for multiple flows. So you have an intralogistics bot, which is basically carrying items from inbound to reserve to a forward area, which has automation as well in the form of goods to person system. Also a sortation system, end of the line after picking for e-com orders, doing the sortation for different zip codes, different carriers. Now, how this basically becomes a truly omni-channel flow is that the same bots are doing flows for cross-dock, e-com, and retail inventory in terms of intralogistics. And depending on where you get peaks and where you get troughs, the bots keep shifting the load between cross-dock or reserve or forward area. So the bot resource is basically shared between all these 3 areas. And depending on where the work is, the bot gets directed there. When it comes to picking, you have different cutoffs, for example, for store orders to go to the store, like your transportation for stores to be happening generally happens in the morning. The e-com orders, for example, get shipped at like 5 or 6 in the evening. So intraday, you just need to be able to flex your capacity between different flows. And when it comes to these different types of orders, you have different types of problem statements, right? So you'll be picking a store order in large cartons, consolidating it into a pallet and shipping it out. Whereas an e-com order would be picked in smaller cartons, put onto, let's say, a sortation bot and sorted into carriers. So the ability to be able to manage this throughout a day and then on different days just shift and flex your capacity is not something a human being can effectively do, right? So if you're expecting your warehouse manager to sit there and actually go through all these flows, trying to fix which flow is mapped to which bot and how many bots, that's never going to work. You need the software to be as smart as your hardware, and so you need, or actually smarter, and you need the software to automatically decide where to shift that load onto. And that's basically, yeah, that was the first example.
I think we've probably got time for one more. Any more questions? Well, let me also show, this is actually our booth pre-setup. It actually looks even better than that now. It's got a nice big video screen, but we're in the other part of the exhibition center. Do please come by, because we've got some of the bots on show, and we've certainly got a lot of people there that can walk through and tell you more detail about some of the different types of implementations we've done, solutions. We'd love to have you over there. Right now today, we've got coffee. We've got really good espresso. So if nothing else, do come by and have an espresso, and Mayank will be there, Wes will be there, and a lot of the other implementation experts from GreyOrange. So thank you so much. We appreciate your attendance, and hopefully you've gone away with some things to think about. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.